The recent disorders in Seattle's central area are a cause of grave concern for the entire community, black and white. Covering this frightening and fragile situation has been a frustrating experience. Reporters have virtually operated in a vacuum. The principals in the situation, black people and policemen, are suspicious of outsiders. In some incidents, police officers provided little information or sometimes misled reporters about the seriousness of the situation. This is not to suggest that this attitude was a formal police department policy. On at least one occasion, for instance, officers responsible for providing the emergency information were not alerted by the downtown headquarters, and until we called them at home, they were unaware there was any trouble. On the other hand, many central area black residents see reporters only in the same circumstances they see police, when there is trouble. Some consider newsmen to be apologists for the police and agents of a power structure that has repressed them. It should be stated clearly that the police, in sizable numbers, were ordered into the central area to deal with disorders, rock throwing, firebombing, and gunfire, which threatened the safety of residents in that area and motorists driving through it. The police are convinced their initial and restrained response was less effective than the so-called get tough policy which was adopted a week ago Wednesday night. The situation has quieted since then. The immediate result has been an uneasy truce. No one knows the long-range effect. The first day of the month, accompanied by 2 employees of King, one of them a photographer, and 3 members of a militant group called the Black Panther Political Party, I went into the area to try to find out for myself firsthand what was happening. Subsequently, I've spent 4 of the past 8 nights observing in the central area. That first night was the evening after the mass arrests of more than 60 persons. It was reasonably quiet that night. The fire station at 23rd and Yesler was used by the police as a command post. Cars and officers were concentrated there. Many of the officers sent into the area are unfamiliar with it. Some have been shot at, and as a result, they've taken no chances. Some businessmen in the area have asked for more police protection. Some other residents consider the police tactics as akin to those of an occupying force, a swift response to trouble by impressive numbers of officers in riot gear carrying clubs, some with shotguns. In most cases, police cars carried 3 and 4 officers. The vehicles frequently traveled in pairs, sometimes in caravans of 3s and 4s. These patrols were conducted through residential neighborhoods as well as business districts. On the street corners of the business district and before apartment buildings and nearby homes, clusters of people, mostly youngsters, seemed to be waiting for something to happen. There were some fires, one at a vacant house at 25th and East James, which was scheduled to be torn down as pictured here. The police sergeant whose unit accompanied the fire department told me that 2 male Negroes, 15 or 16 years old, had been seen running from the rear of the building where the fire had started. The police stood guard while the fire was put out, and though they were taunted by some of the spectators, they were cursed and called names, I heard no reply from the officers. Their job is not easy. However, a basic question is whether some police officers sworn to preserve order and provide community protection are aggravating an obviously explosive situation by exchanging insults. Again, this is not to indict every police officer, but one incident of this sort is too many. The Police Department Manual, Chapter 2.03, dealing with the rules of conduct, includes a paragraph, 2.03.090, dealing with courtesy, and it reads, members and employees shall at all times conduct themselves in an orderly, courteous, and civil manner toward both the public and toward other members and employees of the department. Another paragraph, 2.03.140, headed ridicule, states, members or employees shall not engage in any political or religious discussions to the detriment of discipline, nor shall they speak slightingly of the nationality, race, creed, or color of any person or group. Ron Patterson, wearing a beret and a black jacket, the uniform of the Black Panthers, although he is not a Black Panther, walked several times past the police command post at 23rd and Yesler. That was a week ago yesterday, the evening of August 1st. He was cautioned not to speak to the officers.
There were several officers out in the front with the patrol cars. At this point, as I walked past, they turned and first one to another, a cat call, something like, meow. And then one of the officers looked at me and said, "Hi, Blackie, how you doing?" So I still didn't say anything. I just walked straight on down. At this point, I hadn't said one word to the police at all. As I walked along here, I got more cat calls, and someone across the street said, "Oh, Blackie's out again tonight," or "Blackie strikes again." Both of these comments came sort of together. Coming along through here, the police opened and closed the gun for no reason. He turned around and went into the car, pulled it out, opened it and closed it and put it back, and sort of snickered. "Hi, Blackie, how you doing?" This was another comment that came along at about the same time. The officers started to gather out onto the street, which time I crossed the street and came back up the other side. And here, the officers that are sitting here are the same thing all over again. "Hi, Blackie, how you doing?" "Blackie strikes again tonight." Car, you know, and phooey, sick 'em, and all that kind of stuff. This was the major thing that went on all the time. And again, I hadn't said a word to one of them, not one at all.
Patterson is a King TV production department employee. The evening of July 29th, an automobile mechanic named David Clayton said that he was standing at the corner of 26th and Cherry. He has signed an affidavit swearing that the following description of what happened is true.
The crowd started throwing rocks. They started throwing rocks, and then had about 5 or 6 police cars. They just piled in all at once and started getting out. They got out, and they started striking the kids, you know. And after they ran all the kids off the street, well, they came across the street, approaching us, you know, and it was about 4 or 5 of them. And one of them, he came to me and he said, "Clear the street," you know, and I went to back off a little, and he said, "Clear the street again," and they shelled me, you know, and he struck me across my chest and across my chin and throat, and I had a bad cut. And so I just walked off and went on to my car. And,
Did you receive medical treatment?
Yes, I went to the hospital, and I had 6 stitches. And,
Did you say anything to the officers as they came down the street clearing it?
No, I did not. I didn't say a thing.
Why didn't you move when the police were clearing the street?
Because I figured I didn't have to run, because I hadn't done anything, see?
That same night, across the street and down a couple of houses, Deanna and Danny Finister with some friends were sitting on the front porch of their home at 557 26th Avenue as the police ran after the rock throwers. Finister also has signed an affidavit swearing that his description of what happened is true.
And we figured we didn't want to be involved in the trouble at all, so we come inside my house. So we came inside the house and we all sat down. And then the policeman came down in front of my house, and then they demanded that I open my door. And I said I wouldn't. And then one policeman took his nightstick and then rapped on the window, and that's when he broke it. And then that's when I got real mad and opened my front door to see what was going on. And then when I opened my front door, about 15 policemen rushed inside. And when they rushed inside, everybody started getting panicky, moving in the hallway here. Then they advanced their way in here. Then when they first entered the door right there, when they came in, they released tear gas. You know, it didn't start getting strong till afterwards. Then they came in this closet right here where my wife keeps her ironing boards and all our knickknacks and stuff. They start throwing all this stuff all out, and it was all out in the middle of the floor. Then they came up into the bedroom and then advanced their way into my bedroom, and they started looking through my closets. Then they came out of the bedroom, and then I was standing in the hallway there. And then the policeman, I kept asking and telling them that they didn't have a search warrant, but he didn't say anything. And I asked him, would they please get out of my house, but he wouldn't. Then he said, shut up. And I said, no, I don't have to shut up in my own house. And he said, shut up. And I said, no, I don't have to. And this is when he hit me with his stick in the stomach and pushed me back up in the kitchen. And at this time, my wife and child were up in my daughter's bedroom, and she was crying and holding my daughter. And about this time, the policeman started to leave and go out the door. And I asked the policeman what was his name, and then he told me, well, I didn't ask you your name, did I? And then they left the house. After the policeman had left, my house was filled with tear gas, and me and my wife had to leave and stay at a friend's house up the street, and we had our 9-month-old daughter in the house, and it kind of affected her a little bit. So we left and went there, and later on I came back down and aired the house out because we weren't able to stay here because of the tear gas in the house.
Both of these complaints are among several which have been turned over to Mayor J.D. Brayman. Last Sunday evening, August 4th, King photographer Bill Dorsey and I spent several hours in the central area riding in a car with the acting chairman of the local chapter of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, Ron Carson. We were sitting in the car in the front parking lot at Garfield High School. Across the street, near a drive-in, several rocks appeared to be thrown at cars and at a bus. Shortly after that, several police cars arrived. The officers ran toward the rear of a house in the middle of the block south of the drive-in, apparently in pursuit of the rock thrower. They found no one, returned to the cars, got in, drove around the block, and we followed. By the time we arrived, several officers were wrestling with a suspect who was beneath them on the street on 22nd Avenue between Jefferson and Yesler. I never had a clear look at the suspect because as we arrived, a wall of policemen blocked our path and our view. Though we identified ourselves as news people, the officers continued to stand between us and the action. We used no lights to aid the filming because we realized that was a technique which, of course, could inflame the incident. When I repeated that we were newsmen, several officers had turned their backs to the photographer, formed a screen around him, and pushed him some 20 feet from the street to the lawn of a nearby house. Here's Dorsey.
This is approximately the spot where I was standing when I started to photograph the incident taking place in the street. The action was taking place approximately the same spot where this automobile is parked. As I started to photograph, 4 policemen moved toward me with their backs to the camera. They were blocking out the view of my camera, and as they did this, I started to move back because of the jabbing with the elbows, and they were using their nightsticks to prod me under the arms. They jabbed me in the midsection, about in this part of my body, 3 or 4 times. By this time, I discovered that I was back about this far on the lawn, and the only thing that brought a halt to this action is when Ted Bryant, who was accompanying me on this mission, ran over and informed the police again that we were newsmen, and I think that he was probably recognized at this time. About this time, I was way back on the lawn, about 20 feet from where the action had taken place, approximately where this car is parked.
The lieutenant in charge of the detail, when I refused to leave, asked if I wanted to be arrested too, and I replied that if he wished to arrest me, then that was his decision, but to order his men to leave the photographer alone. The obvious reason for the unexpected action of the police was to prevent us from filming what was happening. The officers seemed unconcerned that a dozen witnesses, spectators, perhaps more, were watching the incident from the sidewalk and from house and apartment windows. Their only concern appeared to be in preventing us from filming what was happening. It was dark, and most of the figures are in silhouette against the lights of the police cars. This film has not been edited. It is being shown now exactly as it was taken, including the sudden movements as the camera is jostled by the officers. At one point, if you'll watch closely, a policeman moves toward the camera, turns his back, and a nightstick strikes the lens. You'll see that action now. It is obvious the photographer was unable to stand still in one spot to try to film anything. I'd like you to see that sequence again where a nightstick strikes the camera, and we will repeat that section twice more. The subject of the arrest turned out to be a juvenile, 17 years old. Because of his size, it was assumed at the time of the arrest that he was an adult. His case has now been referred to juvenile court. This is the camera which was struck by the nightstick, and you can clearly see the dent there. Fortunately, the lens was not broken. And this is the light meter which Bill mentioned was jerked from his neck and flung down to the ground. As you can see, it would take some leverage to separate the meter from this string. A formal written protest of our treatment has been sent to Mayor J.D. Bremen. Police Chief Frank Raymond was on vacation when I called the department to register a similar complaint there. Assistant Chief M.E. Cook said he had been told by a sergeant at the scene that we had been in the way. Chief Cook declared himself surprised at such an incident, said that if the events as I had related them were true, such a thing should not have happened. When I asked if reporters could expect such tactics as a matter of policy in future situations of this sort, he replied that any action of this kind was entirely outside policy and that the police had no intention of not allowing the press to see what's happening. I am prepared to accept this as a statement of police policy. I am also prepared, having encountered excessive police force firsthand, to believe that if news people experienced in police operations, even known to some of the officers, are subjected to this kind of treatment, even once, that some people without our resources may be treated worse. The situation we experienced is at least inefficient law enforcement, at worst a blatant declaration that some policemen consider themselves to be above the law. The police have a vital and an exacting role. It is essential that assignment be carried out efficiently, with restraint, and without provocation. And I trust that most law officers would agree with that. Violence on the street by rock, bullet, and firebomb, or by misuse of billy club, handcuff, and tear gas cannot be tolerated. There must be order, and there must also be justice.